Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 to 38, KJV, Bible Study and Spiritual Commentary. Today we will journey deeply into the Word of God, studying Genesis chapter 19, verses 1 through 38. This powerful passage reveals the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the rescue of Lot, and profound spiritual lessons about righteousness, judgment, mercy, and obedience. To fully understand Genesis 19, we must first connect it with Genesis 18. In Genesis 18, Abraham intercedes before God, pleading for Sodom. God reveals that the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah has become great, and their sin is very grievous. Yet we also see God's mercy as he agrees that if even 10 righteous people are found, the city would be spared. Genesis 19 continues this narrative and shows the unfolding of God's justice and mercy together. Historical and cultural background. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were located in the region near the Dead Sea, part of the ancient Jordan Valley. These cities were prosperous, fertile, and wealthy. However, according to biblical and historical understanding, they became centers of moral corruption, violence, pride, and spiritual rebellion. From a Hebrew perspective, sin in Sodom was not only sexual immorality, but also arrogance, injustice, lack of hospitality, and disregard for God's righteousness. Ezekiel 16:49 later confirms this, saying that Sodom's sins included pride, fullness of bread, abundance of idleness, and failure to help the poor and needy. Thus, Genesis 19 reveals a society that had rejected God's order and embraced wickedness as normal. Verses 1 to 3, the arrival of the angels. 2 angels arrive in Sodom at evening and meet Lot sitting at the city gate. In ancient Near Eastern culture, sitting at the gate meant authority and leadership. Lot had become a respected figure in Sodom, yet he remained spiritually compromised by living among a corrupt people. Lot bows to the angels and urgently invites them into his house. This reflects the sacred Hebrew value of hospitality. Protecting guests was considered a moral and spiritual duty. Here we see a contrast. Lot still retains some righteousness and reverence for God, even while living in a corrupt environment. Verses 4 to 11, the sin of Sodom revealed. Before the visitors can rest, the men of Sodom surround Lot's house. They demand that the visitors be brought out so they may abuse them. This moment reveals the depth of moral decay within the city. In Hebrew understanding, this scene symbolizes complete societal corruption. Sin had moved from private behavior into public culture and collective identity. Lot pleads with the crowd and calls them brethren, showing his complicated relationship with them. In desperation, he offers his daughters a deeply troubling moment that reveals both the cultural pressures of the time and Lot's compromised spiritual judgment. The angels intervene, strike the men with blindness, and pull Lot back into the house. This act shows divine protection and also symbolizes spiritual blindness, a condition where people persist in sin even when confronted with judgment. Verses 12 to 22, warning and escape. The angels warn Lot that judgment is coming. They instruct him to gather his family and leave immediately. However, many of Lot's relatives do not believe him. They think he is joking. This reflects a common biblical theme. When people become comfortable in sin, they no longer take God's warnings seriously. Even Lot hesitates. This hesitation reveals the human tendency to cling to familiar surroundings, even when they are spiritually dangerous. God's mercy is clearly shown here. The angels literally take Lot, his wife, and daughters by the hand and lead them out of the city. This demonstrates that salvation often comes by grace, not by human strength alone. The command is clear. Escape for thy life, look not behind thee. Verses 23 to 29, judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah. As dawn breaks, God rains fire and brimstone upon Sodom and Gomorrah. This dramatic event symbolizes divine judgment against persistent, unrepentant sin. From a theological perspective, this is not merely destruction, but a demonstration of God's holiness and justice. God is patient and merciful, but he does not ignore evil forever. Verse 26 presents a powerful spiritual lesson. Lot's wife looks back and becomes a pillar of salt. In Hebrew thought, looking back represents longing for the old sinful life. It symbolizes a divided heart physically leaving but spiritually attached. Jesus later refers to this moment in Luke 17:32. Remember Lot's wife. This serves as a warning against spiritual compromise. Verses 30 to 38, aftermath and human weakness. After escaping, Lot and his daughters dwell in a cave. Fear and uncertainty lead to tragic decisions. resulting in the birth of Moab and Ammon. These events remind us that even after deliverance, human weakness remains. Salvation does not automatically remove all consequences of past environments. Yet even here, God's larger plan continues. Through history, even imperfect, situations are woven into God's redemptive story, spiritual lessons, and God's message. Genesis 19 teaches us several profound spiritual truths. First, God is both merciful and just. He hears the cries of the righteous and responds to persistent evil. Second, environment matters. Living in a corrupt society can slowly weaken spiritual clarity. Lot was righteous yet compromised. Third, salvation requires obedience. When God calls us out of spiritual danger, we must not look back. Fourth, God's mercy often acts before we fully understand. Lot hesitated, but God still rescued him. Finally, this chapter reminds us that God desires righteousness, compassion, humility, and faithfulness. Judgment comes not because God delights in destruction, but because he desires a world aligned with his holiness and love. As we reflect on Genesis 19, let us examine our own hearts. Are there places where we are hesitating? Are we holding on to things God is calling us to leave behind? Are we living with a clear devotion to God? May we walk forward in faith, trusting in God's mercy and living in his righteousness. Thank you.